All right, I'm going to take you through how to repair a bent bucket. This is something that I've been doing for a while. Most tractors, they have bends mostly in the top. Sometimes you can also have a bend where the blade is in the bottom, but that's kind of rare. But you can use this. You can use this approach or this method for both the bottom of the bucket and the top edge of the bucket. It works pretty good, and you can get a bucket that's bent up pretty bad back to where it was, at least as far as what the eye can see. You can't tell it really was bent if you use this method. I get it pretty straight usually, and I always like to straighten out any bent buckets because that's the first sign that someone's kind of attached a chain onto it or misused the bucket a little bit perhaps. It's really common. I shouldn't say misused, but it's a common thing where you just put a chain on the bucket and you hook it on to wherever you hook it on, and before you know it, the bucket's bending when you're trying to lift something. So that's a real common thing. It's not necessarily misusing the machine. It's really just something that happens, and once it does happen, people tend to hook the chains on the appropriate spots going forward, but it happens and then the bucket's bent and it just stays bent for the life of the machine. So whenever I see a bent bucket or I have a machine with a bent bucket, I try to straighten it out as much as I can, right? And you can see this one here, it has a slight bend in it, and if you look down the edge of it, that's where you can really see it. See how wavy that is? I've seen buckets that were much, much worse than this, I'll be honest with you. This is not that bad. But I'm using this bucket as a demonstration of what I would do to put it back where it needs to be. Okay, so first thing you want to do is get yourself a piece of steel. This is a trailer receiver metal. So this is something you would use on a trailer hitch on a vehicle, and they sell these in different lengths. This is a 4-foot length. Obviously this is meant to be cut down and used, and you put a trailer receiver in there and you would weld this onto a truck, right? But this is not really what I bought this for. I bought this to straighten out buckets, and what it really does well is it's rigid because it's obviously a square tube versus a round, right? So this thing doesn't move. And this is a 30 or 40 pound piece of metal that's really, really strong. That's what you want. Again, this is like 2.5 inch trailer receiver pipe, they call it, or tube, and it's really a square tube, and it's really heavy duty. So you're gonna take that and use that to straighten your bucket. So if you think about it, it's pretty simple, right? You have either clamps or a vise that you're gonna use and a couple blocks of wood, and you're gonna get that tube on there, and you're gonna bend it the other way, right? You're gonna bend it back to where it's supposed to be. And the way you want to do this is you want to mark the both the ends of the bend, and you want to mark the peak of the bend, and you'll kind of see what I mean in a second. But so this to me would be the peak, right? It's the center. So the center is there. That's the crest, right? That's the top of it pretty much, right? And that's where your vise, your clamps are going to go. So you're kind of like in this range, right? That's the peak of it right there. And you gotta mark where it starts. So it starts here, and it starts about in the middle. So you can see, if you look at this, right, you got your starting points. On the left, there's one, and on the right, there's one. That's where the bend or the arch starts and stops. And this is the top. This is the most bent part of that bend, right? This is the highest point. So again, look down the bend. You've got it marked off. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take this receiver tubing and you're gonna put it underneath this, and you're gonna use a couple clamps and a couple pieces of wood on either side, and you're gonna clamp it where it starts and where it stops. And then you're gonna take your vise or another clamp if you want, you can do that as well if you don't have a vise, and you're gonna squeeze on the top. You're gonna squeeze right here. That's gonna draw it down back to exactly where it was. We're getting pretty close. So close that you won't be able to tell that it was bent ever. So I'm gonna do that now, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like. Okay, I wanted to show you this before I mounted it underneath the bucket, but I've got a couple blocks of wood, and it's nothing fancy, right? There's no need to cut down good 2x4s. These are old 2x4s. you can cut these up, you know, if you need to make some blocks. And this is how it's going to be mounted underneath. And I want to show you this because this is kind of the whole thing, right? So you're going to mount it from underneath right next to that line, right? So that's going to be your starting point. And then you're going to mount the other block, you know, right next to that line you've drawn. So if you can kind of imagine what's going to happen, you've got a 2x4, right? So you got 1.5 inch difference from the actual steel to where the metal of the bucket's going to be. So in order to get this bend to go back, you actually have to bend it beyond flat, almost beyond flat, and like a little bit more in the other direction. And the only way you can go beyond flat is if you have 1.5 inches, you know, some kind of space right in there. You don't need 1.5 inches, but let's call it 1/2 inch. So when you bend this bucket back, you're going to have to go 1/2 inch past flat to bend it to stay flat, if that makes any sense. But what you want to do is put the blocks underneath it exactly where those lines are, and then you're going to put your vise exactly where the peak is. And if you look at it from this angle, the peak might be even a little more in this area. It doesn't have to be perfectly in the center, but the vise needs to be in the range of the crest, right? And that's what you're going to do. I'm going to do that next. I'm going to mount it underneath. Okay, I've got the clamps on there. I like to use just a regular household quick clamp, right? This is just a slide clamp. These don't have to be, the clamps, all they're doing is holding the metal in place with the blocks of wood. They're not really doing anything more than that. So it doesn't have to be, you know, a titanium heavy duty clamp. It can just be a regular woodworking clamp that most people would have on their shelf, right? So I like the quick clamps because when you're trying to lift this in place with one hand, it's about 40 pounds, and it just makes the adjustment and the attachment process of the clamp much easier, right? You can use seat clamps that have a screw mechanism on there. Obviously a little more awkward to use when you're holding a piece of metal and trying to tighten it. And then I like to use a vise. To me, when I do this, I want a nice, large, high quality steel vise, right? This is something you don't want to use, you know, a cheaper steel clamp or a cheaper steel vise on, because you're putting pressure on metal and you're bending metal, so you don't want this to break. And depending on how severe the bend is in the bucket and how heavy duty the metal is in the bucket, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on this, right? So sometimes you'll have to use, you know, a pipe extension on the end of the vise to turn it. And, you know, use your own judgment here. Obviously, if you're going to turn it with a 3-foot pipe on it, you're going to break the vise, right? Or the clamp, the seat clamp that you're using to bend the metal. So when it comes to doing this, never stand, when you're turning this, never stand directly over it, because if this was to ever let go, it's gonna come up at you. So always stand off to the side, and then use your best judgment, right? You can put a 16 inch or a 1 foot long extension on that and turn it, no problem. But don't put like a 3 or 4 foot pipe on there and think you're gonna turn this and it's not gonna break, because the vise, even though it's heavy duty, you put enough pressure on it, it'll just break. So this is exactly kind of what it'll look like. I've already turned it down where it's flat. I'll probably go another maybe like half a turn or a full turn, and that'll bring it down 1/2 inch below flat, and then it'll just stay there. But this is the whole technique. There's nothing really earth-shatteringly complicated about it, and you can do this in about, I don't know, 15 minutes. Your bucket will be pretty much put back. You know, if you've got 2 or 3 bends, you know, it's going to take longer because you're going to have to do this in 2 or 3 different spots. But usually that's not the case. Usually it's a bend right in the center, or it's a bend right on the edge. And it's always from the chain, where the chain was connected to with a hook, and it'll just bend that bucket. And that's usually it. So again, you know, you've got the blocks of wood are mounted directly underneath here. And so the clamp is holding, you know, underneath here. If you were to look, it's a block of wood which starts here and goes, you know, on this side of the line, and the clamp is going to be on that side of the line as well. It's kind of loose because I've got it compressed, so you can tighten it up again if you want. But so the clamp's holding on the right side of the line. It's holding the wood and the metal, and it's on this side. It's on the left side of the line. It's holding the wood, the block of wood, and it's holding the metal. And it starts here, the wood, and it goes this way. So you have the starting point, you've got the end point, you've got it all figured out, and I've got I got the vise. By eye, I could tell that my center line was a little off. So I took my vise, and you can do this when you go to bend it. You can see it. Take your vise and just put it on there and start turning it, and it'll go right back where it's supposed to be. And that's the whole procedure. You can do that either direction, on the top of the bucket or on the bottom of the bucket. It works the same way. And you want to get the 4-foot pipe because that fits in between the walls of the bucket. If you've got a 5-foot bucket typically, or a 6-foot bucket, obviously a 4-foot piece of pipe fits in between both of those. They're pretty much the standard sizes, the 5 or 6-foot buckets in width. You can do any bucket in this way, and it should come out so straight that you probably won't even be able to see the bend with your eye unless you pointed it out to somebody. I do have another video on my channel that shows how to fix the flange area if that's got bends in it or kinks in the flange itself. It's a different procedure than this. This is more just used for top and bottom bends, either up or down. You can pull it back into place. Okay, and hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions at all about using this technique, just please reach out on my channel.